to 3. Blessed is the one who does not walk in step with the wicked, or stand in the way that sinners take, or sit in the company of mockers, but whose delight is in the law of the Lord, and who meditates on this law day and night. That person is like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season, and whose leaf does not wither. Whatever they do prospers. Mr. Speaker, I take this opportunity to extend my heartfelt gratitude to their majesties for the confidence and trust that they placed in me as a custodian of this key portfolio in government. In particular, I'd like to thank His Majesty for being the unifying force in our nation and for giving us the mandate and direction as articulated in the speech from the throne. He has set out an ambitious agenda for us as a nation, an agenda that highlights our strengths and is forward-looking. His Majesty reminded us that time is of the essence in our socio-economic transformation, and that above all else, we must keep moving forward. Echoing His Majesty's speech that there's no time to lose. The government and the economy cannot live beyond its means year after year. In the previous budget cycle, Cabinet outlined a strategy to resuscitate the economy. This led to the launch of the Eswatini Strategic Roadmap 2019 to 2022, which aims to establish a policy framework that will ensure sustainable economic development, financial stability and growth, ultimately improving the quality of life of the people of Eswatini. This strategy necessitates adjustments in the short to medium term to ensure long-term sustainability. Mr. Speaker, government is committed to fiscal consolidation by finding ways and means to improve revenue inflows while trying to contain expenditure. However, fiscal adjustment alone cannot suffice. Essential structural reforms in economic policy are integral to the adjustment process. The focus on these reforms is on economic growth and stability. We must enable all sectors of our economy to attain a path of high and sustained inclusive growth. Even though the focus of this year's budget continues to be on building a resilient economy through fiscal consolidation, we are starting to see positive signs of growth, reflecting a promise of green shoots. Government has introduced measures to rationalize expenditures and make unavoidable sacrifices to ensure the long-term growth and fiscal sustainability. We are rising to this challenge and nurturing the seeds of progress while ensuring that preconditions of positive results are created. As Martin Luther King Jr. said, human progress is neither automatic nor inevitable. Every step towards a road of justice requires sacrifice, suffering, and struggle, the tireless exertions and passionate concern of dedicated individuals. Likewise, for the government, it has not been easy. Wages and salaries have been stagnated, budgets and overall spending has decelerated. Mr. Speaker, government continues to face cash flow challenges, causing us not to meet our financial obligations on time. This has resulted in the accumulation of significant arrears, which has placed a burden on suppliers of goods and services. This year, we have accumulated, this time last year, we had accumulated an arrears stock of 4.2 billion emalangeni. This excluded most of our arrears and capital projects and what has been referred to as invoices and draws. We made it a priority to settle these outstanding payments, and late last year, suppliers and service providers were called upon to resubmit the invoices and supporting documentation for verification. The internal audit team and Auditor General's Office are now conducting a verification exercise of these invoices so that the payment process can proceed. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to inform this House that our efforts are showing signs of success, as the total amount owed now stands at 2.2 billion emalangeni. This includes the old arrears, it includes the invoice and the draws, and includes the outstanding capital payments. We acknowledge that while dealing with existing arrears is part of the problem, our efforts will be in vain unless we ensure that this does not happen in the future. To curtail and discourage any spending happening outside of the budget and to improve overall budget execution, government has instituted a new reporting structure whereby each ministry reports on execution to the Planning and Budgeting Committee once every 2 months. I commend my fellow cabinet ministers and their teams for the efforts that have gone into this process and the great improvements that it is showing in this year's budget spend. While Eswatini is in a year of improved SACA receipts, We are committed to stay firm on the demanding course of fiscal adjustment we have set for ourselves. We will continue intensifying our efforts to eliminate our structural inefficiencies. We are cognizant of how cyclical buffers in SACA receipts create an illusion that leads to increases in expenditure. We are committed to using this temporary larger fiscal headroom to cushion our reserves and meet our payment obligations. Mr. Speaker, this budget is designed to improve the delivery of services and distribution of resources to all citizens, in particular the vulnerable groups. Mr. Speaker, His Majesty's government is committed to expanding the size and scope of the private sector in Eswatini. The Eswatini Strategic Roadmap and the National Development Plan speak volumes to our ambitions in this area. As His Majesty highlighted in his speech from the throne, government has declared 2020 as a year of the micro, small and medium enterprises, which I'll refer to as MSMEs, and will develop this sector focusing on access to finance and markets, empowerment of citizens and provision of incentives for SMMEs. The country needs to leverage on MSMEs the potential to build an economy that works for everyone. And it's essential that we create new jobs, protect and grow existing businesses, and attract foreign direct investment. We must continue to focus on the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead in order to achieve His Majesty's Vision 2022. Mr. Speaker, may I now present to the House the global and domestic economic developments. Mr. Speaker, according to the World Economic Outlook, global economic activity is on a downward trend. The IMF has revised downwards the global growth in 2019 to 2.9%, a record low since the global financial crisis in 2008. This can be attributed to increasing trade tensions, particularly between the world's two largest economies, China and the USA, and larger uncertainty surrounding trade and geopolitics. Macroeconomic strain in several emerging markets and developing economies, in addition to structural factors such as low productivity growth and aging populations in advanced economies, are also contributing to low economic activity. In 2020, according to the IMF, the global growth is expected to improve slightly to 3.3%. In the sub-Saharan African region, growth has been revised downwards to 3.3% in 2019 and 3.5% in 2020. The sluggish growth is largely attributed to the region's two largest economies, Nigeria and South Africa, and the broader group of resource-intensive economies. Further risk to growth for most sub-Saharan African economies include climate shocks such as severe droughts and flooding. Dwindling growth in the rest of sub-Saharan Africa can weaken potential benefits Eswatini could yield from its continental neighbors. Despite a moderate rebound in the second quarter, growth is expected to be subdued in the Southern African region and the Republic of South Africa in particular in 2019. This follows a negative first quarter, which reflected the larger than anticipated impact of labor strikes and energy supply issues in the mining sectors, coupled with weak agricultural production. South Africa is Eswatini's major trading partner, and any developments in South Africa are likely to have an impact in Eswatini. On the domestic front, the latest figures indicate that economic activity was fairly resilient in 2019 and increased by an estimated 1.4%, in spite of the continued fiscal challenges and the weakening global demand. The positive growth during 2019 greatly benefited from improved regional demand for the country's major exports in key markets, including the Republic of South Africa. Manufacturing activity rebounded in 2019 following improved developments, in particular in South Africa, the USA, and the European markets. This resulted in the increased demand of the country's major exports, such as food and processing and manufacture of beverages and textile products. Other positive contributors to growth include the service sector, especially in the ICT subsector, which continues to benefit from the increasing innovation in this sector. In the primary sector, animal production improved, boosted by continued restocking of the sectors as it continues to recover from the 2015-2016 drought effects. Despite the improvement in animal production growth, though, the primary sector weakened during the period. Under the secondary sector, construction-related activities contributed negatively to growth due to the effects pertaining to fiscal challenges, which resulted in some projects being delayed, deferred, or not commencing at all. The service sector contracted during the period and contributed negatively to growth. This was mainly due to reduced activity in public administration and in the wholesale and retail subsector, owing to fiscal challenges which were linked to curtailed domestic demand. Mr. Speaker, a volatile outlook is anticipated for the medium term, with a positive outlook for 2020 as growth is expected to reach 2.6%, according to the World Bank. The growth in 2020 is backed by an anticipated relief of the government's fiscal position. The relief is linked to the clearing of arrears coupled with a rebound in government spending, and thereby stimulating domestic demand and promoting growth in sectors such as wholesale and retail, as well as tourism. In the medium term, economic growth will average 1.5%, anticipating continued fiscal pressures. This will intensify the need for fiscal consolidation. Full implementation of the strategic roadmap and the National Development Plan, which are geared towards sustainable and inclusive economic growth, remains key to achieving economic recovery in the medium term. Risks to the economic outlook, however, remain, and these include climate change issues such as recurring erratic weather patterns affecting agriculture and agro-processing. Further, the increase in trade tensions in major economies, reducing external demand, poses a risk to the domestic growth. Headline consumer inflation has been on the downward trajectory for the past 2 years. The downward trend is a result of normalizing food prices and declining housing and utility prices, owing to improved cash crop production in the agricultural sector and the freeze in the utility prices respectively. The average inflation for 2019 was recorded as 2.6% and is projected to remain below the upper CMA bound of 6% in 2020-2021 and over the medium term. Mr. Speaker, an analysis of the country's trade with the rest of the world results that in 2019 the country recorded an improved 4.6 billion emalangeni current account surplus, rising from the 1.3 billion surplus the previous year. The significant rise in the surplus equates to 6.9% of the country's GDP. The positive trade balance, amounting to 3.9 billion emalangeni in 2019, is explained by a 16.2% rise in export receipts, largely dominated by the country's export of soft drink concentrates, followed by sugar exports. On average, 69% of the country's exports are destined to the South African market. Kenya, Nigeria, and Mozambique have remained above the 1% market share, showing an increased trend in our exports going to African countries. Also, partly contributing to the significant rise in export receipts is the weak lilangeni against major global currencies, which benefited exporting companies. In the last 5 years, total imports from the South African markets have been in the 70 to 73% market share range. South Africa remains the main source of service imports for the country. However, net payments for these services declined by 22% to 1.9 billion in 2019 when recorded with the previous year. Mr. Speaker, as of December 2019, the monetary policy stance was kept accommodative, with the discount rate decreasing by 0.25 percentage points from 6.75% to 6.5%. In line with accommodative monetary policy stance, total credit extended to households and businesses was calculated at 13.5 billion in December 2019. This is an increase of 8% compared to December 2018, where 12.4 billion emalangeni was extended as credit. The increase has mainly been driven by credit extension to households, which grew by 12%, while credit extended to businesses remained relatively stagnant. Mr. Speaker, one of the major responsibilities of government is to provide a sound financial regulatory framework for the country in order to create an environment which promotes private sector development. Government will, in this financial year, undertake a holistic financial sector reform to ensure financial stability and integrity. As at March 2019, the Savings and Credit Cooperative Society assets grew to 1.7 billion emalangeni from 0.85 billion emalangeni when the financial regulations came into effect. This is an 85% increase in the assets of this sector. Mr. Speaker, other developments within the financial sector include the automation of the Eswatini Stock Exchange, which has been completed to facilitate the participation of the ordinary Eswatini to buy and sell company shares and debt instruments using their electronic devices. This is a major milestone in the progress towards financial inclusion. This move will facilitate electronic trading, which should encourage more listings as well as acting trading exchange. The Eswatini Stock Exchange also incorporates a platform that enables micro, small and medium enterprises to participate in the stock exchange. We expect Eswatini businesses to benefit from accessing available financial resources to be able to expand their businesses through the stock exchange. Mr. Speaker, the central bank currently assesses the financial sector in order to ensure that it's stable. It is noted, however, that pockets of vulnerabilities do exist. These risks largely emanate from the low interest rate environment prevailing both domestically and internationally. The low interest rate has the potential of boosting economic productivity, but could, on the other hand, incentivize risk-taking in the search for yields from investors. The Central Bank of Eswatini continued to monitor the banking sector in light of a volatile global environment and has instituted mitigation actions. Consequently, the banking system's resilience has improved over the year. This was largely due to enhanced capital quality and increased coverage of risk for capital market activities introduced by the migration to the Basel II and IFRS 9 rules. Risks from the non-banking financial sector remains elevated despite notable growth in the sector's assets over the year. The risks originate from the volatility of financial markets over the year. Concentration risks remain high in the pension and retirement fund subsector. For this reason, government together with the central bank have drafted a financial stabilities bill. The bill aims to be an overarching guide to macroprudential surveillance, while the ultimate goal of macroprudential surveillance is risk mitigation planning for potential crises, and how to manage risk is also a significant pillar of guarding financial stability. In this regard, the central bank's work of formulating a crisis binder is ongoing and is further exploring options of establishing a deposit protection scheme. The scheme is an integral part of the crisis preparedness and crisis management and resolution framework that's currently under development. This framework will bring the country in line with international best practices on macroprudential surveillance in light of dynamic global risk parameters, to which the Kingdom of Eswatini is not exempt. Mr. Speaker, the Basel II implementation project has started. The aim of this regulatory enhancement is to ensure that consumers are protected and banks remain resilient to shocks. It is anticipated that all the pillars bylaws will be finalized in the financial year 2020-2021. The Central Bank of Eswatini continues to review secondary legislation for laws under its purview in trying to be responsive to changes that prevail in the banking landscape. Mr. Speaker, the Eswatini Financial Intelligence Unit has continued to play an important role in the anti-money laundering and counter-financing of terrorism efforts, both from a policy and technical perspective, through its distribution of information to law enforcement agencies. Mr. Speaker, to ensure the integrity of the financial system, the central bank has reviewed and deployed its anti-money laundering and counter-financing of terrorism risk-based supervisory framework. The aim is to ensure that the financial system is not used to launder illicit funds to finance terrorism, and if it so happens, such practices is quickly monitored and perpetrators are detected and deterred from such conduct. In addition, government passed legislation which provides a mechanism for civil forfeiture of the proceeds of crime. This is a process that runs parallel to the criminal prosecution and seeks to separate offenders from the ill-gotten gains. Mr. Speaker, to ensure prudent administration of exchange control, the central bank phased in a risk-based approach, resulting in the adoption of a financial surveillance function. Stakeholder engagements with the authorized dealers increased to ensure the ease of implementing the surveillance function. The central bank will be revising the simple guide of exchange controls to further enhance the understanding of the foreign exchange system by the public. Mr. Speaker, there's been a steady increase in reserves from the 1.8 months of import cover recorded in March 2019. Gross official reserves stood at 6.6 billion in January 2020, equivalent to 2.8 months of import cover. This is still not where we want to be, but the reserves are trending in the right direction towards the 3-month benchmark. Mr. Speaker, in 2019-2020, government revenue and grants are projected to amount to 17.6 billion emalangeni, equivalent to 25% of GDP. This was recorded against an initial estimate of 18.8 billion emalangeni, and this shortfall is largely attributed to the late implementation of revenue measures in the Finance Act of 2019 and the non-passage of other anticipated revenue measures. However, at 17.6 billion emalangeni, the projected revenue and grants for 2019-2020 is still higher than the 2018-2019 outturn of 15.7 billion emalangeni, which is approximately 24% of the 2018-2019 GDP. The higher revenue recorded in 2019-2020 reflects the improvements in SACA receipts and the collection of other tax revenues. SACA receipts increased from 5.8 billion to 6.3 billion and contributed about 36% of the total revenue, which is equivalent to about 9% of our GDP. Mr. Speaker, total government expenditure for the year 2019-2020 was budgeted at 21.8 billion. This indicates a 32% of GDP, which is about 3% higher than the outturns of 2018-2019. Mr. Speaker, the deficit for the financial year 2019-2020 was estimated at 4.4% of GDP, which is lower than the 6.1% of GDP for previous financial years. This reflects a decrease from 3.6 billion emalangeni to 3 billion emalangeni. Whilst we have been able to fund part of this through local borrowing, a major proportion of the funding gap will not need any mobilization of additional finances because of reduced spending resulting from control measures applied by government matching expenditure to available cash. Mr. Speaker, at the end of December 2019, total debt stock stood at 19.2 billion emalangeni, equivalent to 28.12% of GDP, of which external debt is 7.1 billion emalangeni, equivalent to 10.38% of GDP, and domestic debt at 12.1 billion emalangeni, equivalent to 17.74% of GDP. In the 2019-2020 financial year, government signed loan agreements with different external financiers for the financing of infrastructure projects, including the Manzini Water Supply and Sanitation Project, the Manzini Golf Course Interchange Project, and the International Convention Center Project. Government continued to raise funds from the domestic market for the financing of capital investments and to develop the financial market. Mr. Speaker, it's important that government manages public debt prudently in order to ensure that it's within the stipulated threshold of 35% of GDP. Therefore, we will continue to exercise restraint when contracting any debt and further adopt more effective fiscal management principles and practices. In this regard, government will be getting technical assistance from the World Bank to develop a medium-term strategy which will assist in evaluating the cost, the risk, the trade-off associated with alternative financing strategies over the medium term. Mr. Speaker, cash flow management has continued to be a pressing issue for government. Low performance in the domestic capital market coupled with unfinanced expenditure has led to severe cash flow constraints having a negative impact on the overall economy, including crowding out the private sector activities. Arrears owed by government have accumulated over several years, indicating a pattern of unsustainable public expenditure. The government recognizes the severity of the situation and has made it a top priority to tackle the obstacles of economic recovery manifesting in the cash flow challenges. An arrears clearance strategy has been prepared to address the delayed payment to suppliers of goods and services and a special committee has been established to implement the strategy. In addition to this, I'm pleased to announce that we have made a plan to clear the arrears. Mr. Speaker, in 2020-2021 fiscal consolidation continues to be our primary short-term goal. The overall objective is to bring government finances back on a sustainable path and prevent further accumulation of arrears, which hampers the performance of the economy at large. Fiscal consolidation will enable us to create the fiscal space through proper expenditure prioritization, budget allocation efficiency, and wider revenue mobilization. The budget I present to this Honourable House reflects the ongoing process of fiscal consolidation. We have managed to reduce the budget deficit as planned in order to contain it to financeable levels. We will continue to explore equitable measures that will improve the overall balance. Mr. Speaker, the budget for 2020-2021 displays an increase in recurrent expenditure by 8.4%. This has reduced the deficit to 3.6% of GDP compared to 4.4% of GDP in 2019-2020. Consolidation has proved to be a very challenging process, considering the needs for government operations and service delivery as presented by line ministries in their budget submissions. I believe that the work undertaken to come up with this budget is a step in the right direction towards a low fiscal deficit. On revenue mobilization, the expectation is that growth in our domestic revenue base shall continue. Ongoing strategies for improvements in the collection of value-added tax, company tax, fuel tax, and personal income tax will reduce some of the revenue collection challenges we have faced in the past. Mr. Speaker, the five most recent IMF and World Bank country reports caution that Eswatini's largest budgetary outlier on the expenditure side and also the single largest contributor to our fiscal deficit is the size of our wage bill. We simply cannot afford to ignore this problem. Since the implementation of the freeze on employment, the number of civil servants has been reduced by a little over 1,000. As much of these policies and trends need to continue, we must also ensure that the quality and effectiveness of service delivery is not affected. Mr. Speaker, an unfortunate consequence of the cash flow challenge, a contribution of many factors, is that it has resulted in government not being able to grant a cost of living adjustment for the past 3 years. I'd like to thank the Public Service Associations and its members for being tolerant and understanding in these difficult times that we are trying to overcome. We have continued to provide and pay for notching that has taken place every year. However, this has only been a benefit for some civil servants. This notching has increased the national wage bill with an average of 1.5% annually. This year, we have budgeted 113 million emalangeni for notching and 227 million for a cost of living adjustment. Mr. Speaker, government continues to prioritize the agriculture sector for investment in order to spur economic growth and overall acceleration of national development. The projects and programs attracting government budget in this sector are aimed at addressing food insecurity and rural poverty. A special thanks is directed to our cooperating partners for their continuous support to the country's agriculture sector. During the planting season 2018-2019, the country received good rains which had a positive impact on crop production. As a result, 96,773 metric tons of maize was harvested. This increase in production is also attributed to the Food Security Program, which provided subsidized farm inputs. Under this budget, government will continue to support the input subsidy program, with a budget allocation of 40 million emalangeni. It is envisaged that maize production and productivity will be improved as the country receives a grant of 34 million emalangeni from the Japanese government for procurement of agriculture machinery and equipment. This will help improve access to farming equipment by small-scale farmers and will significantly support maize production. The agricultural sector has received a lot of assistance from development partners to build its resilience and improve production. Several measures are being implemented in response to climate change, and these initiatives are ongoing to enhance production. A number of coordinated programs include the High Value Crop and Horticulture Project, the fruit tree project, the smallholder market-led project that have started to generate significant input for farmers. The farmers have been supported to diversify their production from the traditional sugarcane and maize production to horticulture and small stock production. This has seen a marked increase, especially in local vegetable production. A total of 3,627 metric tons was purchased by retailers from local farmers, with an economic value of about 40.9 million emalangeni over the past 6 months. Investments have been made to improve the marketing of such commodities through the construction of collection points and cold storage facilities in strategic locations around the country. Mr. Speaker, government has allocated funding to finance the implementation of projects relating to water harvesting and irrigation development. A total amount of 745.1 million emalangeni has been allocated in this budget to finance the Lower Usutu Smallholder Irrigation Project, Phase 2, where a further 6,000 hectares of land is earmarked for irrigation development. The construction of the main canal conveyance system to deliver water to the Matata area is over 80% complete. The goal of this project is mainly to improve the standard of living of the population in the project area through an environmentally sustainable process. Under this budget, a total of 1.6 billion emalangeni will be provided to the Ministry of Agriculture to ensure adequate service delivery for crop and livestock services, agricultural research, water harvesting, and irrigation development and commercialization of the agriculture sector. Mr. Speaker, government continues to implement a number of water and sanitation projects aimed at promoting economic and social development. To date, the national potable water coverage stands at 69%. Government will also be implementing a water supply and sanitation project in the Nhlangano Sipambanweni area in the Shiselweni region, funded by the World Bank, amounting to $45 million. This project seeks to provide potable water for domestic consumption, institutional and commercial usage, as well as improve sanitation coverage and the long-term management of water resources. Mr. Speaker, government continues to create an enabling environment for investment in the energy sector. The Eswatini Energy Regulator Authority has launched a competitive bidding process, procurement process for a 40 megawatt solar PV power plant and has already identified the qualified bidders. Civil works for the construction of the EEC's 10 megawatt solar farm in Lavomisa PV plant has also commenced, and the plant is expected to run by June 2020. The 13 megawatt Lower Makuduza hydro power plant is expected to be completed by December 2021. Government, in partnership with key stakeholders, continues to explore the viability of establishing more power plants locally, from coal, wind, hydro, biomass, as well as natural gas. While the country is strengthening its local generation, significant progress has been made with electricity access through the Rural Electrification Program, which continues to uplift the lives of many in Eswatini. To date, the national electrification rate stands at 80%. Government has also worked on the preparatory phase for the construction of the Strategic Oil Reserve Facility in pursuit of energy security in the petroleum sector. This project is now at resource mobilization stage. Mr. Speaker, the hardship and suffering of disadvantaged segments of our society has not passed unnoticed. To support the citizens affected by poverty, government has increased the allocation to Bokoko Nabomkulu from 400 emalangeni to 500 emalangeni per month. The old age home based at Mankayan is also expected to be completed in 2020-2021 financial year. In addition, the monthly grant for the disabled has been increased from 180 emalangeni to 280 emalangeni per month with effect from January 2020. We hope that the revised grant allocations will provide some relief to our most vulnerable, while fully acknowledging that this is only a first step towards the creation of a benefiting social security net. In creating a conducive environment, the DPM's office will finalize the development and regulations of the Children's Protection Welfare Act, the Sexual Offences and Domestic Violence Act, and the Persons with Disability Act. Mr. Speaker, government will continue to invest in our most important resource, that is, our people. In an effort to enhance human capital development, especially on investing in children, government has continued to safeguard budget allocations for the social sector. Mr. Speaker, the budget allocation for education is above the international benchmark of 15% of total government expenditure. An international study has shown that Eswatini is amongst the top 10 investors in education in the world relative to our GDP per capita. The year 2020-2021 marks 10 years since the country introduced free primary education program in all public primary schools. In the 2020-2021 fiscal year, government will continue to implement and sustain the program with more focus on improving the quality of education and learning outcomes. In 2019-2020, government introduced and successfully implemented a competency-based curriculum in grade 1, which is now expected to be rolled out grade by grade annually. This curriculum has been developed to reflect the aspirations of Eswatini, national development priorities, and the needs of society. The new curriculum places strong emphasis on the development of essential competencies, skills, values, and attitudes in order to prepare learners to become effective contributors to the economy and social development, as well as becoming global citizens who can compete internationally. Mr. Speaker, we'll continue to support the Grade 0 program currently offered in 80 public primary schools. Following the assessment of the Grade 0 program, government's focus will be on improving the regulation and efforts to early childhood care and development education. The country continues to face challenges with regard to limited access to secondary education. Currently, the enrollment rate at secondary level stands at 46.3%. In an effort to address this challenge, government is engaged in a dialogue with the World Bank to receive support in addressing issues of internal inefficiencies in the education system, resulting in high dropout and repetition rates. With English no longer being a compulsory passing subject, the number of repeaters and dropouts is expected to decline. A repetition strategy has been developed aiming to reduce the repetition rate while preserving the quality of education in the country. Mr. Speaker, government's in the process of completing 4 fully fledged inclusive secondary schools, 1 in each region, with support from developing partners. Construction of the 4 schools is expected to be completed during the school calendar year 2020. In an effort to address teacher management issues, government's in the process of introducing a computerized teacher file management system to improve the efficiency of the teacher management functions in the Ministry of Education and Training. The introduction of this system demonstrates government's commitment towards adopting a culture of excellence in service delivery. Mr. Speaker, an amount of 3.5 billion emalangeni is allocated to the education sector, corresponding to 15.3% of the total budget. This budget will facilitate the provision of equitable, quality, and relevant education opportunities for all people in Eswatini. Mr. Speaker, government will continue to strive for universal healthcare coverage. Programs and activities towards the fight against HIV/AIDS are being successfully implemented and have greatly assisted us to reduce the HIV incidence from 2.9% in 2011 to 1.4% in 2019. This means that fewer people are getting infected by HIV. This success has been achieved due to government and partners' investments in these programs. We'd like to give special thanks to PEPFAR, the Global Fund, the Republic of China and Taiwan, and the UN agencies for their support. This commitment and support needs to be sustained, and this requires an expansion of the breadth of services available at clinical level to ensure better treatment outcomes. In this budget, government has provided 274 million emalangeni for ARVs. Mr. Speaker, I wish to express appreciation to It is forward-looking and embraces the challenges and opportunities of a globally interconnected labor market. The overarching objective is to manage labor migration so that it protects workers, develops the country's economy, strengthens skills and developments, and benefits society at large. Government has finalized a national social security policy and implementation plan, which will establish the Workers' Compensation Insurance Fund, the Eswatini National Pension Fund, and the National Health Insurance Fund. Mr. Speaker, the National Human Resource Development Policy and Implementation Strategy is set to be operationalized by the end of the current financial year. The policy is designed to facilitate the development of relevant skills and competencies to meet current and future labor market needs for an increased labor market participation and thereby spurring economic growth. It will address issues of lifetime learning, culture of productivity, work-based learning, and skills mismatched. Government has introduced a new online study loan application system in line with the e-government strategy. The use of the system by applicants commenced in February 2019. Government has further introduced a new 30 days interval study loan disbursement system that has been effective from September 2019. Mr. Speaker, in the coming financial year, government will undertake a comprehensive review of the study loan management system and propose a new institutional arrangement and a sustainable public-private partnership-based financing model. Mr. Speaker, improving the quality of life and economic well-being of our people remains a priority for this government. I'm pleased to report that the allocation for the Regional Development Fund has increased from 110 million emalangeni to 177 million. This is to ensure that there's equitable development in the different Tinkundla. I thought I was going to get a hand clap there, but Mr. Speaker, the private sector is the engine for economic growth and job creation. Government's policy aims to end the uncertainty that has undermined confidence and constrained the private sector investments. Government has produced a draft master plan earmarked to push the implementation of the development agenda. This plan contains projects to be discussed with development partners in the planned donor conference as part of the resource mobilization drive. Mr. Speaker, 85% of Eswatini now have access to formal financial services. Financial inclusion is higher amongst women at 87% compared to men at 83%, and higher amongst adults residing in urban areas, which is 90%, compared to rural areas, 83%. Government will, in the financial year 2020-2021, develop and finalize the financial inclusion policy as well as legislation to improve access to development finance. The National Financial Education Strategy will also be concluded to provide a framework and roadmap to educate Eswatini financially. Mr. Speaker, Eswatini's national and cultural heritage are the main tourism attractions. Utilizing our national heritage endowment by realizing its tourism potential will provide Eswatini with significant benefits. Notwithstanding its current level of development, the tourism industry has made impressive progress. The country has been rated as the 5th best world destination to visit in 2020 by Lonely Planet, which is one of the leading global travel agencies. Eswatini is now known is now a known international tourist destination of choice, which strongly justifies development in tourism potential for the benefits it will provide to Eswatini. Mr. Speaker, government will review the tourism bill, which intends to create an enabling environment for the tourism sector to thrive. Mr. Speaker, the country endeavors to safeguard the environment, conserve wildlife and culture, ensure sustainable forest management, reduce meteorological hazards, and build a climate-resilient country. Eswatini stands to experience environmental degradation through water and air pollution, coupled with the indiscriminate cutting of trees and widespread littering. In addition, the country continues to be prone to extreme weather conditions. This results in an increase in natural disasters, which adversely affect socio-economic activities in the country. It is therefore becoming critical to strengthen the early warning systems and collaboration between the Meteorological Service and all affected sectors. The government of Eswatini launched a Clean Eswatini campaign named Kota Tibi. The campaign is being rolled out in the form of monthly nationwide cleanup campaigns undertaken every last Saturday of the month. Government's in the process of launching a tree planting campaign, which aims to create awareness and promote good environmental management practices. Mr. Speaker, the deteriorating performance and efficiency of the public enterprises is an increasing concern to government. Most of these entities are fully dependent on government funding, and only a few are self-sustaining. Some of these entities have continued to fall behind in PAYE and VAT payments, amounting to over 1 billion emalangeni. Therefore, government will conduct a study to streamline and enhance performance as well as sustainability of these entities. This is aimed at reducing the number of enterprises by merging those with similar mandates. In the medium term, government plans to develop policy guidelines for the establishment and management of public enterprises. Mr. Speaker, business connectivity and government service accessibility has been improved through the rehabilitation of some of the obsolete central infrastructure and equipment. This includes replacement of the government core network equipment and security. In 2020-21 financial year, government will, with the assistance of development partners, further digitize its service as well as extend networks to the Tinkundla service centers and health facilities. Government will continue with the implementation of projects at the Royal Science and Technology Park, which includes completing the construction of the one-stop shop service center, currently at 83% completion. The service center will give assistance to the administration and implementation of the Special Economic Zone program and house a temporary quality testing and assurance lab, which is intended to enable the execution of the bioeconomy strategy. Mr. Speaker, government will continue to scale up the National Data Center, which is now operational, and to mitigate and modernize the government ICT architecture. Furthermore, funding has been secured for building a data recovery center. Mr. Speaker, the significantly large investment that government has made in the road transport infrastructure is a reasonable measure of success over the past years. Through the support of government's development partners, further road infrastructure improvements will be carried out, including the construction of the Manzini Golf Course interchange. The service roads along the MR3 highway will, once fully completed, help to ease the traffic congestion along this corridor, as it has proved to be the backbone of the country's road transport network. Despite some challenges faced during the implementation of certain projects, such as the Nhlangano-Skunuza Road, it remains imperative that such projects be completed and that government is currently addressing these issues relating to these projects. To ensure the lifespan of such investments is protected, there is a need to set up a roads maintenance agency. Mr. Speaker, the railway subsector continues to be the major mode for the transportation of bulk commodities. An expansion of the existing network is therefore necessary to increase the cargo handling capacity from the current estimated 6 million metric tons per annum to 14 million metric tons per annum, with the operationalization of the Stogot-Luthe link. The link is a new line that traverses about 100 kilometers in Eswatini, and the connection on the South African side is about 47 kilometers. Preliminary work on the project has commenced. To prepare this route for construction, 253 project-affected properties have to be resettled. Eswatini Railways has earmarked on the expansion of the Matsapa dry port. Funds amounting to $969,000 have been sourced from the Republic of China and Taiwan to finance the development of the architectural designs and feasibility study for the project. Mr. Speaker, the Eswatini Civil Aviation Authority continues to engage potential businesses to invest and operate within the civil aviation sphere in areas of airline establishment, to increase commercial activity at KM3 Airport and to implement the Special Economic Zone program within the KM3 International Airport area. We need to ensure that all these operations at the airport and in the country's airspace meet the licensing requirements and the expectations of the industry through a safe, secure, environmentally friendly and sustainable operations. Mr. Speaker, government endeavours to create more employment and attract foreign direct investment with the intention to catalyse industrialisation for sustainable economic growth and poverty alleviation. Meaningful growth will be achieved by enabling the private sector to lead and do what it does best, growing our economy and creating employment. Mr. Speaker, the recently launched strategic roadmap is government's commitment to catapult the country into a growth path that will channel every Eswati into productive economic activities. Electricity and internet affordability remain key priorities for government to stimulate the private sector growth and productivity. Therefore, government will expedite the national plans for promoting local production of electricity to reduce the cost of power. We'll continue to promulgate pro-business policies in an effort to bolster the operating environment. This will enhance the potential of the private sector to contribute towards economic growth and employment creation. A vibrant private sector will lead to improved food security, access to affordable internet and communication services, a thriving renewable energy industry, increased tourism, and full utilization of our preferential trade agreements. Mr. Speaker, government continues to foster the development and promotion of MSMEs. Notable milestones is the Manzini Trade Hub construction, the Informal Traders Revolving Fund, leather and leather products developments, and participation in international forums advancing the agenda of MSMEs, growth and promotion. The promotion of MSMEs, however, is dependent on support to access affordable finance, advisory services, infrastructural support, and the availability of a skilled labour force. Mr. Speaker, MSMEs face a relatively acute challenge in terms of retaining and attracting their workforce. Inability to meet internationally accepted quality standards remains one of the major challenges for our MSMEs with regards to penetration or access to international markets for their products. Government has not only entered into various trade agreements, but has taken innumerable steps to ensure the growth and promotion of the industrial sector. In order to assist MSMEs to access international markets, a national quality assurance infrastructure has been set up to strengthen their capacity to provide international best practices and standards. New trade opportunities are being created for the business sector to take advantage of trade agreements, such as the Economic Cooperation Agreement between the Kingdom of Eswatini and the Republic of China on Taiwan, and the African Continental Free Trade Area, which will become operational in July 2020. Mr. Speaker, we'll continue to build resilient public financial management systems and procedures, as these are key requirements for any government to develop a sound financial policy. The rollout of the Public Financial Management Act of 2017 provides a legal foundation to the 21st century PFM practices. The rollout of the PFM Act is a continuous process that requires training of civil servants on the adoption of the new regulations and IT systems as we migrate to new PFM practices. Mr. Speaker, to support the full compliance of the PFM Act of 2017, we'll continue implementing the Integrated Financial Management Information System that we refer to as IFMIS, replacing the existing system. The IFMIS will serve as an effective platform to implement many provisions of the PFM Act, particularly accurate and timely reporting. The procurement of the vendor to supply the IFMIS system has commenced and will be completed in the first quarter of the financial year 2020-2021. Mr. Speaker, security has a direct impact on investment growth, social and human capital, and protection of public institutions. Government will continue ensuring responsiveness and effectiveness in the sphere of safety and security through the use of science and information technology. The aim is to reduce contemporary crime and address state security challenges. Support to our security forces as we pursue economic stability and growth in the country is key to sustainable development of our nation. This budget seeks to strengthen public order management and state security systems, which are important factors in ensuring that the country's safety and security landscape is conducive for investment. Mr. Speaker, government enacted a Small Claims Court Amendment Act of 2019 in a bid to operationalize the Act of 2011 for the adjudication of small commercial cases. Courts will assist in reducing the backlog of civil cases and settlement of civil disputes. These courts will also have a positive effect in achieving excellence in improving access to justice and contribute to the country's development. Mr. Speaker, corruption remains an impediment towards sustainable economic development in our kingdom. Government has reinforced the fight against corruption and crime by providing for the civil forfeiture of illicit gotten assets as guided by the Prevention of Organized Crime Act of 2018. This will be achieved through the establishment of the Asset Forfeiture Unit and Asset Recovery Committee under the Director of Public Prosecutions. Proceeds of any criminal activity will be traced and forfeited to the state. As a country, we cannot afford to lose a single cent through crime and corruption if we are to achieve our objective of zero tolerance to corruption. In Kotlagalo, Yinzaba Yetu Sonke, we shall call the nation to assist in preventing and eradicating corruption by using whatever means of technology at one's disposal and to expose the perpetrators. Mr. Speaker, the Office of the Auditor General will continue to provide assurance and accountability through audits to promote transparency and good governance. Government will continue to support institutional capacity building initiatives in this public office. This year's budget includes an allocation for an audit system which will expand the scope and coverage of audits to include technical, capital, and other audits. A special budget of 8 million emalangeni has been provided to undertake forensic audits for some selected capital projects. Mr. Speaker, government continues to be committed to protecting the basic human rights of citizens. This includes, but is not limited to, the rights of health, social care, education, and all other interdependent rights, including economic rights. This is in line with the Sustainable Development Goals that we refer to as SDGs, with a particular focus on the most vulnerable citizens of our country. Further, the need to ensure gender equality in the implementation of the SDGs cannot be overemphasized. Mr. Speaker, revenue forecasts for 2020-21 financial year are projected to be 21.2 billion emalangeni, indicating an 18.4% increase from the 17.6 billion in 2019-2020 financial year collection. A number of factors underpin the expected increase in collection. In particular, SACA receipts are expected to be 8.34 billion emalangeni, which is a 32.5% increase from the 6.3 billion 2019-2020 financial year amount. Mr. Speaker, in addition, these figures account for several proposed policy measures that were aimed at increasing revenue receipts. The timely approval of increases in taxation of alcohol and tobacco products, lotteries and gaming, road tolls, and fuel have seen revenue shifting on a slightly upward trend. Mr. Speaker, total expenditure for the financial year 2020-2021 is estimated at 24.1 billion emalangeni. This includes an amount of 2 billion for public debt payments. Appropriated recurrent expenditure is set to grow by 238 million emalangeni compared to 2019-2020 financial year, now standing at 16.2 billion emalangeni. The capital budget allocation is 6.4 billion emalangeni in 2020-2021, which is an increase of 12.4% compared to the 2019-2020 financial year. Thus, the total expenditure for financial year 2020-2021 is 2.2 billion emalangeni above the budget expenditure for 2019-2020, which is a 10.6% increase. Mr. Speaker, the budget deficit for the financial year 2020-2021 is projected at 3.6% of GDP. Our fiscal deficit is estimated to be 2.9 billion in 2020-2021 financial year. This figure is in line with the SADC macroeconomic deficit targets to not exceed 5%, and government intends to lower it further in the medium term. Mr. Speaker, by virtue of the responsibility entrusted in me as a Minister of Finance, and now present to this August House the budget estimates for 2020-2021 financial year. Revenue and grants, 21.2 billion emalangeni. Appropriated recurrent expenditure, 16.15 billion emalangeni. Appropriated capital expenditure, 6.38 billion emalangeni. Total expenditure, 24.08 billion emalangeni, and a deficit of 2.88 billion emalangeni. In conclusion, I'd like to quote a scripture from Galatians 6 verse 9. Let us not become weary of doing good, but at the proper time we'll reap a harvest if we do not give up. To our international development partners, multilateral organizations, and NGO community, we appreciate your continued support and commit to a new era of active engagement and implementation to ensure the outcomes we all desire. All levels of government will be held accountable for transparent, responsive communication and delivery of our responsibilities as your partner. Your technical and financial assistance is invaluable to supporting the economic recovery we speak of today. We acknowledge that in order to continue receiving impactful international assistance, improvements are required internally. This budget seeks to ensure the necessary social, financial, and structural reforms are achieved without compromising our national values. We'll continue our efforts towards qualifying for the Millennium Challenge Corporation funding and strengthen our collaboration with our esteemed cooperating partners such as the African Development Bank, the UN agencies, the European Union, the World Bank, the Government of Japan, USAID, the Government of India, the IMF, the Government of the Republic of China and Taiwan, PEPFAR, and the Global Fund. With government's commitment to fully enable and support a private sector-led recovery, we invite business leaders, both local and international, to engage with a fresh, free market-focused Eswatini. Efforts towards improving the ease of doing business will continue in order to enhance the enabling environment that will support existing businesses and create new local industries. The base of this budget guarantees that the new wealth created will be distributed throughout all levels of society, truly impacting each Leswati positively. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to commend this budget to you, and once again allow me to express my appreciation for the support and cooperation I've received in the preparation of this budget from my colleagues in Cabinet under the leadership of His Excellency the Right Honourable Prime Minister, the Finance Committee of Parliament, members of staff for the central agencies, and staff from line ministries. I thank you all, and happy Valentine's Day. I'm sweating. Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'll grab some now. Thanks. Wednesday.